Welcome to the debate. If someone physically locks you in a room, the crime is obvious. You see the walls, you see the lock, and you know exactly who turned the key.
Right, it's undeniable.
Exactly. But what happens when the cage is invisible? When the person holding the key isn't some cartoon villain, but the person who claims to love you most? Today, we are confronting a really high-stakes question surrounding covert narcissism and gaslighting.
And it is a deeply contested one.
It really is. Are we dealing with calculated, malicious, emotional predators who systematically dismantle their victims' reality? Or on the flip side, has society begun pathologizing deeply insecure people, confusing normal human flaws and defensive behaviors with psychological abuse?
I think we absolutely have.
Well, I take the perspective that covert narcissism is a deeply intentional, calculated system of psychological warfare designed to trap victims in a state of absolute self-doubt.
And I firmly maintain that this modern victim narrative is just heavily overplayed. I mean, the term is vastly overdiagnosed, and these supposed, predators, they're often just traumatized individuals reacting to their own deep insecurities. We are demonizing flawed human beings instead of actually understanding them.
Let's lay out the reality of the situation first, because the scale of this is staggering. Covert narcissism and the gaslighting it relies upon is not just some breakdown in communication. It is a structural campaign of emotional abuse.
A campaign implies a general leading an army, though.
And they are. Look at the data from the DVCC. It shows that 48.4% of American women and 48.8% of American men have faced emotional abuse at some point. And covert gaslighting is the primary, most insidious tool used in these toxic dynamics.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Unlike overt gaslighting, where an abuser blatantly denies objective facts like just screaming that never happened, covert manipulation is subtle. It relies on pathologizing the victim's emotional responses.
Right, the whole "you're too sensitive" thing.
Exactly. It's saying you always overreact. It creates such intense cognitive dissonance that it actually physically alters the victim's brain over time.
Hold on, I completely disagree with that framing right out of the gate. You are establishing a strict victim-predator dichotomy that simply does not reflect reality.
How does it not?
Because the term gaslighting has become wildly overused in our culture today. I mean, we are now misapplying a severe clinical term to simple disagreements, minor lies, and, quite frankly, standard misunderstandings. People have different memories of events.
But I'm not talking about someone forgetting what time dinner was.
But the culture is. That's the problem. Furthermore, the clinical literature clearly states that what we label covert narcissism is often entirely unintentional.
Unintentional?
Yes. A gaslighter often acts this way because they witness these defensive behaviors in childhood, or, they are desperately trying to preserve their own fragile sense of self. They are not executing some mastermind plot of malice. They are terrified of abandonment and reacting to their own relational trauma.
That is a highly dangerous assumption. You are giving a free pass to psychological subjugation by labeling it a mere defense mechanism. I mean, the damage inflicted requires calculation.
I come at it from a completely different way. You are attributing a level of Machiavellian calculation to behaviors that are fundamentally driven by panic and insecurity. Let's look at Dr. Robin Stern's research on the gaslight tango. She defines it as a dance between two people.
But a dance implies willing participation.
Exactly. And that is the uncomfortable truth here. The gaslighter desperately needs to be right, not because they want to destroy their partner, but to bolster their own fragile sense of self. They are trying to hold on to a sense of power in a terrifying world.
At the expense of their partner's sanity?
But when they say, "I never said that," you're making things up. They might actually believe it in that moment, because their psyche simply cannot handle the shame of being wrong. So I have to ask you, are we absolutely sure they are maliciously manipulating, or is the partner just oversensitive and misinterpreting a profound defensive flinch?
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If this were just a spontaneous, panicky, defensive flinch, it wouldn't follow such a highly predictable, structured cycle.
Predictable how?
You mentioned the gaslight tango, but let's look at how that dynamic actually operates in reality. It relies on what researchers call epistemic leverage.
Let's define that for a moment, just so we're clear.
Sure, think of it like this. In a healthy relationship, you trust your partner to be a reliable second set of eyes. If you ask, did I leave the stove on, or was I too harsh at that party, you trust their answer. Gaslighting hacks that fundamental human trust. Covert gaslighting is like a rigged mirror.
A rigged mirror.
Yes, it is not a spontaneous reflection from a flawed person in a moment of panic. It is a meticulously crafted reflection designed only to show what the manipulator wants the victim to see.
A rigged mirror implies a blueprint, though? It implies they built it on purpose?
They do. It intentionally exploits the victim's basic human need for attachment. They use tactics like love bombing.
Right.
Flooding the target with affection and grand promises early on. That is followed by future faking to create a false sense of security. Then, when they suddenly withdraw that affection, they induce a high-stress state of alarm in the victim, only to return with unpredictable warmth.
Which is intermittent reinforcement.
Exactly. It creates a literal chemical addiction to the cycle of abuse and relief. You cannot tell me that level of behavioral conditioning doesn't require calculation.
But you're looking at the outcome dependency and assuming it was the explicit goal from the start. I'm arguing they don't even know they're holding a mirror.
Oh, come on.
No, look at the clinical profile of these individuals. We're talking about people who suffer from severe attachment wounds. The love bombing you're describing, that isn't a trap being set. That is often just an incredibly insecure person desperately trying to secure love the only way they know how. It's the euphoric beginning of a relationship for someone starved of affection.
Euphoria doesn't explain the systemic devaluation that always follows.
It does if you understand disorganized attachment. When they withdraw, it's because their intimacy trauma has been triggered. The closeness becomes overwhelming, so they pull away. They aren't pulling levers behind a curtain to chemically condition their partner. They are flailing.
You are focusing entirely on their supposed lack of intent, which conveniently erases the highly calculated impact of their actions.
I'm not erasing it. I'm contextualizing it.
You're giving them a pass by focusing on their internal panic. But let's look at what that panic actually looks like in practice. Let's look at a specific typology, the good guy gaslighter.
Okay, let's explore that.
This is someone who presents an incredibly considerate, reasonable facade to the public. They are the nice guy, the martyr. If you're listening to this and you've ever had a partner use the martyr complex, you know exactly how suffocating it is.
Suffocating, yes. Malicious, I'm not so sure.
Let's say a partner brings up a legitimate, valid grievance. They say, "It hurt me when you dismissed my career goals in front of our friends." How does this covert narcissist respond? They don't yell. They drop their head, sigh, and say, "Wow, I guess I am just a terrible person then. I can't do anything right. I don't even know why you're with me."
And why must that automatically be malice?
Because it is a highly manipulative trap. The moment they say, "I guess I am a terrible person," the entire dynamic of the room shifts.
Because they're in distress.
No, because the victim is forced to immediately drop their legitimate grievance and rush in to comfort the abuser. It effectively weaponizes the victim's empathy against them. It takes the oxygen out of the room so that the abuser never has to take accountability for what they did at the party.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are taking a moment of intense emotional vulnerability and painting it as a cold, calculated game of chess.
It is chess.
It really isn't. The clinical research acknowledges that the covert narcissist probably has genuine pain of their own. Why are we entirely dismissing the abuser's trauma?
I'm not dismissing it. I'm identifying how they use it as a shield.
But you're denying the reality of it in that moment. When someone who has been chronically neglected or criticized in their youth is confronted with failure in their adult relationship, that shame is overwhelming. When they say, "I guess I can't do anything right," they're crying, their self-pity, that is a real desperate cry for help.
A cry for help that silences their partner.
It is a profound inability to regulate their own emotions. To call that a calculated strategy strips away the fundamental humanity of flawed, traumatized people. If they are in pain, their tears are real.
Their tears might be real, but the function of those tears is subjugation. If it were a genuine cry for help, there would be a path to mutual resolution. But there never is. The victim's grievance is erased. The reality of the victim's pain is erased. The covert narcissist's trauma becomes this permanent, impenetrable shield against accountability.
That's a very rigid way to look at human interaction.
It's exactly what therapist Annie Wright refers to as the both-and paradigm.
The idea that two conflicting truths can exist at once.
Exactly. We can acknowledge that the covert narcissist has genuine pain, and we must hold clearly that the way they manage that pain by distorting their partner's reality is harmful and abusive. Intent does not negate impact.
Okay, but
Let's look at another tactic, isolation. When they use phrases like, "you're the only person who thinks that," or "even your friends agree with me that you're too sensitive," they are inventing an army of people to gang up on the victim. That is not a cry for help. That is a deliberate dismantling of social confidence.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I think you are pathologizing basic human friction. This brings us to the most critical issue here, the boundary line. Where does normal defensiveness end and pathological abuse begin?
It begins when reality is systematically denied.
But today, if a partner says, "I don't remember saying that," or "you're making a big deal out of nothing," they are instantly labeled a covert narcissist and a gaslighter. We are overdiagnosing everyone.
That's a massive generalization.
by your logic, anytime a partner gets defensive, avoids accountability, or genuinely remembers a fight differently, they are executing a campaign of psychological warfare. Memory is notoriously fallible. Two people can experience the exact same conversation in the car and walk away with entirely different realities. We are stripping away the grace required in normal, flawed relationships and replacing it with clinical condemnations.
I am not talking about normal human friction or standard memory lapses. I am talking about structural, chronic reality distortion, and I draw the line firmly at the neurobiological evidence.
Neurobiology?
Yes, it crosses from a communication problem to pathological abuse when it causes physical, measurable damage to the victim's brain.
Physical damage from conversation?
Yes, and this isn't just someone having their feelings hurt. Explain why the victim can't remember the fight clearly the next day. It's not because they have a bad memory, it's because their brain is under attack.
That is highly dramatic language.
It's science. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research demonstrates that chronic relational trauma, like being systematically gaslit, activates the HPA axis in the brain. The HPA axis is your body's central stress response system. Every time the victim's reality is denied, the brain registers a profound threat. It fires off cortisol into the body.
Which happens in any stressful situation. A tough day at work fires off cortisol.
But over months and years of this, that sustained elevation of cortisol is like acid to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the neural region responsible for logging and consolidating short-term memories.
Right, the memory center.
The abuser is biologically dismantling the victim's memory. The victims literally lose their ability to trust their own senses because their hardware is being damaged by chronic stress.
Okay, look, I won't deny the brain scan data. The biology of stress is real, and chronic stress absolutely affects the hippocampus. But attributing that biological damage to a calculated mastermind plot is where you lose me.
It is the direct result of their actions.
Saying that a partner who gets defensive during arguments is single-handedly responsible for brain damage is a massive overreach. The culture right now is just eager to hand out severe clinical diagnoses to ex-partners simply to avoid dealing with the messy reality of mutual incompatibility.
Mutual incompatibility does not cause the hippocampus to shrink.
But bad breakups cause profound stress. Weaponizing clinical terms like complex PTSD or HPA axis dysregulation for a bad relationship is dangerous. It trivializes the experiences of people who survive overt, violent abuse.
It does not trivialize it. It recognizes that psychological violence leaves invisible scars that are just as profound. Let's talk about interoceptive accuracy.
The ability to feel what's happening inside your own body.
Right. It's your internal alarm system. When your heart races or your stomach drops, your body is telling you something is wrong. When that interoceptive accuracy is consistently dismissed by a partner as crazy or dramatic, the brain learns to actively suppress those internal signals.
They tune it out.
The victim stops trusting their gut entirely. Let's look at the tragic end stage of this dynamic, self-gaslighting. The manipulation is so thorough that the victim completely internalizes the abuser's voice. They no longer need the gaslighter in the room to doubt themselves.
They do it for them.
Yes, they preemptively label their own responses as too sensitive before anyone else even has a chance to. That level of destruction does not happen from standard relationship friction. It happens because an emotional predator has systematically hijacked their mind.
Emotional predator. There's that term again. By defining them as predators, you relieve the quote-unquote victim of all agency in the dynamic. You mentioned Dr. Stern earlier. Let's look at her 3 stages of the gaslight effect: disbelief, defense, and depression.
All of which detail the breaking down of the victim's mind.
But look at the defense stage. In that stage, the partner actively argues, gathers evidence, and tries to win the approval of the gaslighter. The dynamic requires the functional participation of both parties.
That doesn't mean they want to be abused.
I'm not saying they do, but the gaslightee has their own vulnerabilities, often an intense need for the gaslighter's approval, what researchers call an urge to merge or a deep fear of abandonment. Cognitive dissonance theory explains that the victim resolves the discomfort of conflicting realities by actively choosing to reorganize their self-concept to align with the abuser.
Choosing?
If we just label one person a predator and the other a completely helpless victim, we miss the systemic relational dynamic entirely. It takes 2 to tango, even a gaslight tango.
That sounds uncomfortably close to victim blaming. Yes, the victim has vulnerabilities, empathy, a desire for harmony, attachment needs, but the covert narcissist intentionally exploits them. Look at the power dynamics at play. The manipulator systematically isolates the victim, interfering with their social relationships to create absolute dependency. They use trivializing, stonewalling, countering, and blocking. These are categorized, documented tactics of abuse.
But categorized by whom? The outside observer?
When a victim is in the depression stage, as Dr. Stern outlines, they are experiencing total cognitive capitulation. They actively agree with the manipulator and police their own emotions just to survive the psychological environment. Their participation isn't a choice, it is coerced through persistent psychological subjugation.
But again, you are injecting malice where it likely doesn't exist. A person with an insecure or disorganized attachment style will naturally pull away when overwhelmed and cling fiercely when afraid. That creates the exact same cycle of intermittent reinforcement you are describing.
But it's still abuse.
Are they a predator, or are they just a deeply broken person trying to navigate intimacy with the wrong tools? When they say you're too sensitive, maybe it's because to them, your reaction genuinely feels completely overwhelming. They aren't trying to destroy your hippocampus, they are trying to survive the conversation.
Intent and impact can exist simultaneously. But when the impact is the systematic destruction of another human being's reality, intent ceases to be a valid excuse. The reason I fiercely defend the victims here is because society is so quick to do exactly what you are doing.
Which is what?
Finding intellectual excuses for the abuser while the victim is left questioning their own sanity. When we demand that victims endlessly analyze their abuser's childhood trauma, we are demanding empathy for the person holding the key while the victim is suffocating.
I am not demanding empathy at the expense of safety. I am demanding intellectual honesty. If we label every insecure, defensive, poorly communicating partner as a calculated emotional predator, we dilute the meaning of true abuse.
We aren't labeling everyone, we're labeling a specific pattern.
We create a society where nobody takes responsibility for their own emotional triggers, their own codependency, or their own role in conflict. Because it is far easier to simply diagnose the other person as a covert narcissist. The hyper-focus on this victim narrative blinds us to the nuanced reality of human insecurity. It leads directly to the demonization of flawed people who need therapy, not a cultural witch hunt.
And I strictly maintain that covert narcissism is a predatory, dangerous form of psychological subjugation It requires strict boundaries and zero excuses. The damage is profound, lasting, and invisible. We owe it to the victims whose realities have been stolen to call hidden manipulation exactly what it is, without hiding behind the shield of communication problems.
Well, the line between a deeply insecure partner and a calculating emotional predator is incredibly thin. It is intensely contested both in clinical settings and in our everyday lives. Examining the root causes of manipulation, whether you view it as malicious subjugation or purely a defensive survival mechanism, reveals the profound fragility of human perception on both sides of the relationship. We must be careful not to mistake human brokenness for calculated evil.
Well, we have not solved this today, and perhaps that is the nature of the invisible cage. When the bars are made of perception, reality itself becomes the battleground, which leaves us exactly where we began, staring into that rigged mirror. Are you seeing the truth, or are you only seeing what someone else designed for you to see? We leave it to you to explore the evidence and decide for yourself.